Hello, friends and neighbors. Good to see you. Good evening. Or if you were in some other part of the world, good whatever it is. I am not a chrono chauvinist. If you're in a different time zone than me, that's okay. That's a choice, and I support your choice. Anyway, hi, I'm Tad. I will be here for approximately the next hour. It is currently 7 p.m. here, California time, on this 16th day of February. And I will be reading more of The Dirty Streets of Heaven, which is what we are in the midst of now. And I will bring you up to date on where we are and what we're doing with the story before I start, at least to a small extent. As I said, I think like week or two ago, the problem with these stories is they're really like almost like, crime thrillers, espionage thrillers, in the sense that I don't know if they're actually thrilling, but in the sense that the plot is very plotty, if you know what I mean. There's a lot of plot because it's all told by one character who's trying to figure things out. There's a great deal of plots, a great number of plot strands sort of hanging around, and I can't really bring it up to date with every single thing. That would take more time than I actually spend reading. But I will try to remind you where we are in the story when I start up again. What else is there to talk about? Well, this has been, as I said, at some length last night, doing the early reading. We have been spending almost the entirety of the last 2-3 weeks. I've kind of lost track now. Raising dogs or trying to get dogs to be calm and get along. And as I said several times last night, it's very much like having toddlers again. It is a form of parenting that I had forgotten about how exhausting it is, because at the moment, when our second biological child was born, she came home from the hospital with us, and half of us immediately came down with the flu. Well, I think all of us may have come down with the flu, but certainly the older child and I both came down with the flu. Anyway, whatever the reasons were, and it's been 20 plus years now, but whatever the reasons were, we had to absolutely separate ourselves because we had a brand new infant, a nursing infant who had just come back from the hospital. So Deb and the baby went off to one part of the house, and I went off with our son to another part of the house, and that basically we hardly saw each other for days and days and days because we just had to keep the baby isolated, and because of that, and because she was a new baby, Deb had to be with her. So anyway, the reason I'm thinking about that is because that's what a lot of the last couple of weeks of dog care has been like. We're keeping these two dogs, kind of very slowly introducing them to each other, desensitizing as one does. Johnny is a very nervous dog, and at first he was very concerned and upset that there was a new dog in the house. He's kind of getting used to it now, and she's a little nervous about Johnny because he is bigger than her. And they had some bad interactions the first couple times, in the sense that they scared each other, or she actually fanged his nose. Not that he probably didn't deserve it, but he's definitely a little intimidated by her now. The problem is, from a purely practical, tactical point of view, is Johnny has a long, thin nose like a wolf, and she is pure pit bull, and she has a blunt snout like Mudeng, the baby hippo. And as a result, there's much more of Johnny's muzzle to grab than she has. And so when they had their contretemps back a couple of weeks ago, she got the best of him. And ever since then, he has been very, very nervous about not wanting that to happen again. So anyway, we are doing our best to just be very slow and calm, introducing them to each other. We didn't think it would be fast because we knew Johnny was nervous. We didn't know that much about Lemon, but we knew Johnny was a nervous dog. And so we're just kind of trying to just, have them in the same room, but kept apart, put her in her crate, let him come out and sniff around the crate and all that. And, things are improving. Things are definitely improving. It's not going quite as quickly as we had hoped, of course, But that was probably optimism, certainly on my part. I can't blame Deb for the optimistic side. That's my job in the relationship, is that be the optimist. It's like, well, I'm sure it'll be fine. But slowly but surely. Anyway, so that's taken up huge amounts of time because basically, unless we want to leave one of the dogs alone, which is just reinforcing the sadness and wrongness of how the current state of affairs is playing out. Deb is kind of constantly with the new dog, and I am constantly with Johnny, and we are constantly in different rooms and kind of swapping back and forth, saying, okay, can you take her off somewhere? I'll bring Johnny out for a while, let him get out of the back room, et cetera, et cetera. But, Deb and I are basically ships that pass in the night most of the time, especially because at this point one of us is having to sleep with the new dog. Don't ask, it's just complicated, but it's like I said, it's like having toddlers, it's like having babies again, which at my advanced age I wasn't quite ready for. I don't think Deb was either, but we're dealing with it. We will survive. The dogs will become at least cautious roommates. We're hoping more than that, obviously, but they're moving now toward accepting each other's presence and etc. So, as I also said last night, it's like the early days of parenting infants, in the sense that, it was like being in a cult at the time. You were constantly thinking, what does he need? Where is he okay? In this case, he was our first child, our son. Did he seem like he was okay with such and such? Or do you think he's cranky because he's hungry? And, and when we would go out with our friends who didn't have kids, even though we might have, dropped him off at a grandparent's, with a grandparent or something, we're still talking about him. What does he need? Is he okay? Do you think we should call and check and see if, And it really was. It was like being a Moonie or something. And I'm sure all of our friends were absolutely sick of it. The ones who didn't have kids. The ones who had kids, I'm sure, completely understood. And in fact, were probably going through the same thing themselves. Anyway, so in the midst of all of this stuff, in the midst of all this dog craziness, which has been going on, I can't remember if it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks, because it all kind of blends together. I am intermittently working on my book, although again, I hope that will become easier in the next little while. And so I'm pushing along on The Splintered Sun, and setting up various other things, some travel that we're going to be doing, including something I'm really looking forward to, which is we're going to go to Denmark in the fall for a festival, fantasy festival it's called. Denmark is a place I've never been, but I would love to go, and I have Scandinavian heritage, although I think my people were probably Norway, but there was a period in time when that was all in flux anyway, so it's Scandinavia, and I haven't been there, and I'm looking forward to it, and I'm sure Deb is too. And then, of course, various other things, setting up, interviews and podcasts and stuff like that, which are still rippling through because of the release of The Navigator's Children. So that's what I'm doing. Deb is working on her fabric stuff as she can find time to do it. I think fortunately for her, it's a little easier than it is for me, because my work is in a separate part of the house than where Johnny is. I'm down here with the cats, who ne'er the twain shall meet, as we've mentioned in the past. So I have to leave John on his own to come down here. Whereas Deb can do her work with Lemon sitting next to her on the couch or whatever, which, is easier for her, at least, I hope. Meaning easier for Deb. Lemon's fine. She's a dog, for God's sake. Anyway, so what else is there to talk about? Not really much. Just, the world as we know it is a scary place sometimes, and right now it's a bit scary. But all we can do in these times is just do our best, pay attention, speak up about things when we feel they need to be spoken up about, and continue to work and continue to do the things that make our lives meaningful to us. And in my case, it's working on stories, and that's what I'm doing. Speaking of stories, I'm going to see which people have appeared to tell me their stories tonight, or at least to share my stories. And I see Kristen, And Kristen is here. Hello, Kristen. Good to see you. Mads, a pleasure. Good evening to you. And let me see if we got anybody else who's checked in so far. Well, there are people on, but I don't have. Oh, okay. There's other comments. Jeremy, hello, Jeremy. Good to see you. Ray Weatherford, hello, Ray. Nice to have you with us. Barb Ann, Isaac, Susan. That's Susan Shamblin. Claudia, Emily. Hello, Emily. Ivan, my old bud. Angie. Angie's here. And Kelly, as always, a pleasure to see both of you. Tracy, hello. And Medardo, mi amigo Medardo. Y bienvenido, señor. Mads, who I already said hello to. Mark Craigbaum, good to see you, buddy. And Christy Sanders. So that's a few people who have checked in so far, and lovely to see you all. And meanwhile, and Mark, other Mark, hello, Mark, good to see you. That's Mark Gamball. We have several Marks that we consider to be among our friends and acquaintances, or friends. Don't want to, those words just go together, but I didn't mean it that way. We have several Marks that we consider to be friends, so it's nice to see a couple of them here tonight. And with that, if I can't think of anything else that needs to be mentioned right now, no, I'm just doing the stuff, and I don't have much to say. I spend all day thinking about what I'm trying to work on, trying to solve problems, worrying about how to tell the story properly. I mentioned last night that I'm struggling with some of the, not the framing devices, but the narrative devices in the story. And part of this is because it is hard for me to write an Ostenard book with lots of different settings that is not tied to focal point characters in each setting. But I started out that way and realized as I got partway through, I'm going to have to keep adding in new characters. And I don't really want to do that, because then that begins to seem like it's hard. Makes it harder for the reader to be invested in the characters they've already met when they keep having new characters thrown at them. So I'm playing with that. It's been a very interesting book, this whole thing, The Splintered Sun, because on the one hand, it seemed like it was going to be very straightforward when I started, and I had quite a complete outline to work with in terms of what I wanted to do. But as I said, then once I got started and realized, okay, I don't mean for this to be a big, long, sprawling, multi-part story, although I do want to come back to this milieu and tell more stories, more standalone volumes with these characters. So I'm introducing a very wide batch of characters, which is fine. That's not a problem. But then having to choose how to tell the story has been very interesting. So I still haven't 100% decided how I'm going to do it, or whether I'm going to go back and fix certain things and change them in certain ways. So I'll let you know more as I go along. It's an interesting process, and it's different than anything I've done quite so far, or at least it feels that way. It could be I'm just losing my mind. That's always a possibility, especially when you have two dogs who can't be allowed in the same room together without being held onto, at least. I don't carry Johnny around, unlike our late lamented Walter, who was like 4 or 5 pounds, and you could basically, you could have put him on you could have worn him like a bracelet, bless him. Whereas Johnny is a good 70 plus 80 pounds, so what holding him means putting on his walking harness and then holding on to it and sitting down on the floor next to him, or walk him around with it. Anyway, I know I sound dog crazy. I sound absolutely dog obsessed. It's only because of circumstance. Our dogs have always been very much just a part of our lives, but very seldom have they ever, except when they were like really sick or something, have they ever taken up as much of our attention as this act of integrating these two dogs has become. I mean, it has really become the theme of 2025 for us so far. Anyway, so with all of that said, I am going to start reading, and let me just check in here. Okay, so what happened in the last bit, which is what I'm going to bring you up to speed on, is that Bobby went to the house of Edward Walker, the man who committed suicide, but then whose soul was not around for the normal adjudication of whether he was going to heaven or hell, which has put the cat amongst the pigeons, as the old expression goes. And so both hell and heaven are in an uproar. That sounds very William Blakeian, but all heaven and hell are freaked out. But Bobby, because he was there when the body was discovered and the soul was discovered to not be there, Bobby has had a lot of weird things happen to him, and he's beginning to feel like, I need to get out ahead of this because I don't want to get hung with something that wasn't my fault. So he's been doing research. But he's gone back to the Walker's house, the house of the supposed suicide, and has met this guy's granddaughter, who is kind of squatting in the house. And she has mentioned that Walker had one friend who was a nice African man. And so Bobby has asked her, hey, would you, if you happen to bump across his name or remember it or anything, please tell me. Because he's very anxious to find out why Walker did this, as perhaps a move toward finding out why he has disappeared, or his soul has disappeared. So anyway, so Bobby then left the Walker house and discovered he was being tailed. And I'll start reading from that point. Go back about a page or two from where I was when I ended up last night. So anyway, so Bobby is driving through the Palo Alto district of San Judas and heading away from the Walker house, and discovers he's being followed. And he finally gets a glimpse of the actual car. And that's where I'm starting. It was some kind of red lowrider with too much chrome and what looked like a scoop sticking out of the hood. I decided not even the archdemons of hell were subtle enough to be that conspicuous. So instead of getting back on the freeway, I took him over the bridge to Ravenswood, a neighborhood about as opposite Walker's tree-lined Palo Alto as you could imagine. The Ravenswood Renaissance of the 60s was long over, and the people on the rich side of the freeway had gone back to the more familiar pastime of ignoring their eastern neighbors completely. And now, poverty held sway again on the east side of Bayshore. It must have been particularly galling to the Ravenswood folks to look out and see Palo Alto's proud skyline on one side and the shining towers of Mission Shores just to the north, a bit like being the one ugly cheerleader on the squad. Our side has got a safe house in Ravenswood, a nondescript little place in an apartment complex off Bay Avenue. The key thing is the parking lot has an electronic gate. I keyed the numbers and drove down into the garage, then quickly drove out the back exit onto the street and circled the building. The tail car, a chopped flame red Pontiac GTO, was still in the driveway, halted by the gate. He saw me coming and tried to back up, but I blocked him with my car. Then I just sat there, waiting to see what he would do next. He confirmed his amateur status by jumping out of his ride and strutting up the ramp toward me, one hand behind him. He was young, skinny, and dressed like the hip-hoppiest ghetto star you ever saw. Sideways baseball cap, big chains, waistline of his pants halfway down to his knees, but he was also as white as the guy on the Quaker Oats box. "What you doing?" he demanded. "You blocking my car, man?" I got out as he reached me. "Am I?" He was clearly psyching himself up for something big and stupid. He bounced around on the balls of his feet like he had to pee, but his hand stayed behind his back. Up close, I could see that he had one of those little chin beards, sparse and caterpillar fuzzy, that always makes me wonder if the guy just missed a patch. "Don't give me no shit," he said, bouncing even higher in his outrage. "I've been following you." And then, like a tired old stripper climbing from a cake, out came his piece, a 9mm. And to confirm the guy's gangsta wannabe status, he held it sideways as he pointed it at me. A recipe for inaccurate fire and a good chance of the shell stovepiping and jamming the pistol. I smiled despite myself as I spread my hands. "Peace, dude. You got the gun. You're the boss." "Yeah, you better recognize." He was still bouncing, and I was a little worried he might accidentally squeeze the trigger and injure a bystander. "What were you doing at Posey's house?" The picture was suddenly clear. I wanted to wince. You mean you followed me all the way over here just because I was parked in your girlfriend's driveway? Scratch that. Your girlfriend's grandfather's driveway? Whatever. I'm the one asking the questions, motherfucker, and if you don't want to get your ass capped, you better just answer them. A little insecure, aren't we? I moved one of my hands in a gentle circle. Look, I'm going to reach into my pocket and take out one of my business cards. Super slow, dude. He grimaced to show me how ready he was to start my ass capping. I felt sorry for his parents, who had clearly spent a lot of money on his very nice orthodonture and would hate the way he was grinding his teeth together. I delicately lifted the card out of my breast pocket with thumb and forefinger and held it out to him. As he stepped forward to take it, I let it slip my fingers and flutter to the ground. In the half second that he stood watching it, I took the gun out of his hand and gave him a sharp smack in the middle of the forehead with it, leaving a horseshoe-shaped red mark. He tottered back a couple of steps and then fell unceremoniously on his butt in the sloping driveway, his face screwed up like he was going to cry. Shit, man, what'd you do that for? Maybe because you were waving a gun in my face? Chill, man. It's not even loaded. I rolled my eyes. So, you drew down on a perfect stranger without even having a bullet in the chamber? I pocketed his gun and showed him my own. What if I'd pulled this? Trust me, it is loaded, and I wouldn't wave it around before I shot you. His eyes got big. You would have shot me? I sighed. Just get up. What's your name, kid? G-Man. I don't mean your code name down at the Dickhead Club. What does it say on your driver's license? Your car already tells me that you live at your parents' house. Nobody buys that much chrome on a grocery bagger's salary unless they're saving on rent. He mumbled something. What? Tell me again, louder. Full name. Garcia. He was as sullen as a third grader caught playing with his Nintendo during class. Garcia Windover. He pronounced the last name like Bendover, which I thought was appropriate because that's what people would be calling him in prison sooner or later if he stayed this stupid. Figures. Let me guess, your parents were hippies. You don't know nothing about me, brah. Oh, but I do. Just look at yourself. Swedes, Frisians, Poles, Scots, all those Caucasian ancestors. God only knows how many kinds of all-white salad mixing together to make the whitest person anyone could imagine, and your greatest desire is to be a poor black man. No, man, I'm not ashamed of my roots. I'm representing the street. Yeah, and your street just happens to have crossing guards at the corners and a lot of gardeners with leaf blowers. I opened the door of my car. Wise up, kid. He scrambled to his feet. What about my gat? I really should hang on to it. Might save your life. But I'll tell you what. You see that card lying on the ground, Garcia? My number's on it. And whether you believe it or not, I'm on your side. So, if you see anyone unusual around Posey's grandpa's house, or notice anything the slightest bit freaky, you call me. Maybe you can earn your piece back. His eyes got big again, and he rubbed at the dent I'd put in his forehead. What are you? Like a detective? No, son. I'm the Lord's avenging angel. I left him thinking about that as I backed out. I hoped he didn't stand around thinking about it too long, or someone was going to come and take the shiny rims off his pretty red car. Chapter 9. A Hot Shadow. Do you have any friends who aren't like us? Clarence asked me. I looked up from my eggs and bacon. Oyster Bill's not only serves booze in the morning, but also breakfast 24 hours a day. My kind of place. You mean living people? Real people? He looked around in alarm. You shouldn't talk so loud. One of the things you'll learn, kid, is that most people don't notice anything out of the ordinary, even if it's not an angel saying it or doing it. I looked him over. Spending time with Sam hadn't changed him yet. He still dressed like an AV geek, in dress shirt and khaki slacks, and even with the day approaching noon, he looked like he'd just gotten out of the shower. I've never seen a creature so clean. Friends who aren't angels. A few. Some living folk are fun to hang out with, and some women are too nice to pass up, or at least too convenient. But I never get very close with any of them. Women? He looked startled. You mean sex? Angels having sex with the living? It's not mandatory. I leaned back and signaled to the waitress for a refill on my coffee. Geez, kid, you make it sound creepy, like reverse necrophilia. We're all living. We all have bodies. It's just that some of us are in a different stage of the process. I narrowed my eyes at him. Why do you ask? You interested in someone? No. You would have thought I'd asked him if he was planning to machine gun a church picnic. No. It's just all so different. Oh, that's right. You only just arrived here in Flesh World. In deference to the kid's fear of being overheard, I paused until the waitress had delivered the coffee and wandered off again. Is it that different than you expected? He had spilled some sugar on the table, and now he drew in it with his fingertip. I don't know. It's strange to have a body. Again, I mean, that's true, right? Because personally, I don't remember it. Neither do I. None of us do. It's part of the game for some reason. Makes us better angels, I guess. Well, I don't get it. He looked around again, worried about celestial spies, I guess. What's the point? If the highest wants people to be good, why doesn't he just make them good? There you go. I put down my coffee cup and sat back. The day had gone a bit gray and windy, the pennants whipping above the ferry dock. You just said the magic word. You win $100. Huh? You just discovered one of the benefits of being embodied. I've been going back and forth to heaven for years, and I don't remember once having a conversation like that up there. Nobody up there asks questions. Maybe you can't even do it without a body. I don't get it. None of us do. The ways of God are mysterious, and so on. And even if none of us remembers what we were like when we were alive or what we believed in, obviously we know the truth now, and it's pretty much exactly what most people expected. As to the whys and wherefores, I've got a question for you. It took him a moment. Yeah? What makes you think there isn't more to come? Maybe we're only seeing as much of the answer as we can grasp. Maybe we only know as much about the real heaven as a 3-year-old knows about quantum physics. He looked a little shaken. That's a weird idea, Mr. Dollar. I'm a weird idea kind of guy. Things had been slow the last couple of days, but the afternoon made up for it. 3 calls, and I took the kid along on all of them. The first was a nice old guy in a nursing home near the 84. Natural causes, a life spent as an electrician, good husband, good dad, no problems. Next, we had a heart attack that took a 59-year-old car repair supervisor right on the cardio machine at the Hudson Street YMCA. After that came a sad one, a fatal household accident in Spanish Town where a young mother fell down in the shower and hit her head. When we arrived at the first, I got a message from my superiors the moment I stepped through to the outside. You are wanted in the celestial city, Angel Deloriel. The words rattled in my brain. There was no obvious source. Your archangel wishes to speak with you. I wasn't too surprised. I knew they didn't like it when one of us wasn't in regular contact, let alone when we moved house without telling them. It wasn't a crime, though. I'd check in tonight. Both the old guy and the young woman went pretty easy. The only controversy was with the car repair guy, one Hilbert Crosley, who turned out to have embezzled a few $1,000 from his dealership's parts department when he had been depressed about his wife's drinking. He had later begun surreptitiously to return it, although he hadn't finished paying it all back at the time of his passing. We bargained with the prosecutor, a slimy fellow, literally and probably figuratively as well, named Puddle of Pus, who recognized that he was going to have trouble winning even with the embezzlement. The rest of the guy's record was good, and Crosley got off with time in purgatory. But he wasn't a bad guy, Clarence told me afterward as we grabbed a burger at a roadside diner. Why did you agree to purgatory? Because even though it was only a property crime, it was a breach of trust, and those can go pretty severely. You don't know Remiel the way I do. Remiel was the judge who had been assigned to Crosley's case. For a being made entirely of holy light, he kind of had a stick up his ass. Trust me, our boy will do that time in P standing on his head. But these are people's lives, Clarence said. So concerned to make his point, he didn't notice the tomato and onions sliding out the back of his burger into his lap. No, these are their whole eternities in our hands. He looked down and frowned, then began trying to wipe the mess away with a pitifully inadequate napkin. Exactly, I said. They're in our hands. In fact, that's kind of the job description. So it's better to lose small than take a risk of losing big. I did my best to explain to him that I'd tried it his way first, going after each case like a high school football coach, trying to lead his underdog team to a big win. But I could tell by the way he looked at me that it just wasn't getting through. He couldn't see it. Which meant that if Clarence was really what they claimed he was, a new advocate in training, he'd have to learn the hard way, like the rest of us had. See, heaven's judges have their own ideas and don't like being lectured on how morality should work. In fact, they pretty much consider themselves to be the literal definition of morality, and they have the power to back that up. A series of agonizing failures taught me the most important lesson of all. Do what you can, take what you can, try to grow scar tissue over the parts that get hurt. If you can't get the judge to see it your way, you must take any little victory you can get. Nobody likes to settle for purgatory, but it beats the hell out of betting on a long shot and losing, because these are people we're gambling on, human souls. It hurts bad when I lose a case, but it hurts them much worse than it does me. The phone didn't ring with any more work, so after our meal I swung by the compasses, hoping to catch Sam and officially offload Junior on him, but my buddy was absent. Monica was there, and although she only smiled and said hello, her whole affect was pretty weird. I wondered if she'd dropped by to see me the night before and discovered that I wasn't at home. But if so, she would probably also have noticed the monstrous charred claw marks on my door, which seemed like the kind of thing she would have mentioned. So maybe she was just wondering why I hadn't called her since the night we spent together. With Monica being so obviously forbearing, I felt like I had a target on my back. I made short work of my drink, staying only long enough to exchange ritual insults with Sweetheart and Walter Sanders and some of the others. Hey, Clarence, I asked as I pulled my jacket on. You want to ride home? I wish you'd stop calling me that, he said. I've seen It's a Wonderful Life, you know. I mean, I get it. And when you earn your wings, we'll stop calling you Clarence and start calling you Harold or Harry or whatever your name is supposed to be. Harrison, he said, sulking a little. Harrison Eli. Yeah, I guess I'd like a ride. It turned out that poor Clarence actually rode the bus to work when Sam didn't pick him up. An angel on one of those smog-belching city buses. Can you imagine? I swear I'd walk first. Nice to see you, Bea, Monica called as I herded the kid toward the door. And you, beautiful. And you. But I didn't linger. Britain Heights? I asked as we drove west toward the hills. I didn't even know that should be east toward the hills. I wonder if that's my mistake. Britain Heights, I asked as we drove east toward the hills. No, wait, it is west. Sorry. Let's start that over again. Confused myself. Britain Heights, I asked as we drove west toward the hills. I didn't even know there were any apartments up there. Not really that kind of neighborhood, I thought. I live in a house. Since when does front office give a big enough allowance for a house? My alarm bells went off again. Who was this kid friends with? No, nothing like that. He squirmed beside me like he wanted to throw himself out of the moving car onto the Highway 84 blacktop. I'm renting a room. Renting a room? From real people? I laughed. You're nuts, kid. Why in the hell would you want to do that? What about when you have your own advocate practice and you have to go in and out at weird times of the night? I don't know. I'll worry about it then. They're easy to get along with, and it saves me some money. Now I knew he was insane. Saves you money? What, you planning on buying a little place of your own someday with a lawn and a picket fence? You don't have to be rude about it. I just believe in being thrifty. The way he said it, I could tell I'd hurt his feelings somehow. I didn't much care. The whole thing was preposterous. We're not people. We don't get to be people. It's not our job. We didn't talk the rest of the drive. I put on Dylan's Blood on the Tracks and listened to Lily, Rosemary, and the Jack of Hearts as we wound our way up through the neat, expansive houses. Clarence told me to pull over in front of a big Spanish-style house near Crestview Park. Nice place, I said as he got out. He shrugged. They're nice people. Thanks for the ride. It's true, I thought. It's true. I thought the kid was a sentimental idiot. But as I drove back down Britain toward the glowing lights of the city, I had an unexpected moment of envy. It must be nice to come home to something or someone occasionally. A house with other people living in it, even a pet. I've never had that, never wanted to get encumbered. I knew I wouldn't still want it by the time I reached the flats, but for that particular moment I felt a touch of something that a less self-sufficient angel might call loneliness. The moment I walked through the door of my motel room, I could feel the baking heat as if I had left the thermostat set at 125 when I went out. Then the smell hit me, so savage and so wrong that I took a couple of stumbling steps backward through the doorway, waving my hand in front of my face, and that was what saved me. The thing waiting in the room smashed into the half-open door, and the impact tore the top hinge out of the wall so that the door sagged crookedly in its frame. An instant later, my visitor stepped on the broken door and crushed it into a splintering mess as it forced its way out onto the concrete walkway like an octopus flowing out of a tiny crevice in the rocks. But this was no octopus or anything else I'd ever seen. It was vaguely man-shaped, but huge, almost 8 feet tall, and so dark that even by the parking lot lights, I could barely make it out except for spreading horns on its head and a sloping, complicated muzzle that made it look a bit like some abstract sculpture of a minotaur. Even from a few feet away, the heat it threw off was painfully intense. There was no question of trying to stand up to something like this. I turned and sprinted across the motel parking lot. I could hear it galloping right behind me, shedding bits of splintered door as it came, so I dove under somebody's sport wagon and desperately tried to claw my gun out of my waistband holster, which is no easy trick while you're lying on your belly crammed under a greasy SUV. The thing still wasn't making a noise except for its deep, grunting breaths. That's good, I thought. If it's breathing, maybe it can be hurt. But it knew exactly where I was, and it was very interested. It circled the wagon. Then a big, hot hand suddenly swept underneath and missed my head by only a few inches, and I swear I felt my eyebrows crisping as if someone had tried to close a waffle iron on my face. An instant later, the thing simply bent down and heaved the whole car up in the air, lifting it so that only 2 wheels still touched the ground. I didn't want to find out what would happen if it dropped it again with me underneath, so I rolled to one side and finally was able to pull my revolver. I emptied it into the middle of the thing, all 5 slugs. I can't believe I missed from that close, but as far as I could tell, it did nothing but stagger the creature a bit and startle it into dropping the wagon, which bounced on its big tires as I took the opportunity to scramble farther away. We were making a lot of noise. As the echoes of my shots died, lights were coming on all over the building. I had no idea what was after me, but I didn't want any ordinary people getting mixed up in this. From what I had seen, my assailant would go through them like they were made of butter. My decision was hastened by the huge horned shadow scrambling over the wagon toward me. Later on, the police who investigated the scene would decide that the car had been vandalized with a blowtorch and a pickaxe, but I was there. Those marks were made by fingers and toes, or hooves, or whatever it ran around on. The screech of punctured metal was enough to tell me what would happen if it ever grabbed me, so I jumped up and sprinted across the parking lot and out into the lights of the busy Camino Real, fumbling for my speed loader as I dodged startled, honking motorists. This is why I hate carrying a gun, by the way. As soon as I've got it, I suddenly keep needing it. Most witness reports afterward describe something like a gigantic black bear in a Halloween wig chasing a man through traffic, and at one point leaping over an entire cab which had fishtailed to a stop behind a clutch of startled drivers. A lone dissenter insisted that not only had the man also jumped over the cab, he was being chased not by a bear, but, quote, a giant gorilla in some kind of Viking hat. Other than that guy, nobody but me seemed to have noticed the impressive sweep of horns. I reached the other side of the Camino Real after about a second and a half in front of the burning black shape. I was almost weeping with anger at my own stupidity in having stayed in the same place 2 nights in a row, and I was gasping for air as well, but I didn't dare stop. I was pretty certain my aim hadn't been the problem with my shoot the fucking thing idea. And I didn't have a new idea yet, so I kept running until I reached the used car lot across the street. Instead of diving under another vehicle, I didn't trust the clearance on any of the economy models sitting there. I ran right toward the showroom window, feeling the thing closing on me from behind as if it were a rolling ball of lightning. A set of talons as wide across as a garden rake whooshed over my head. As I felt my hair sizzle, I reflected that at least I had a pretty good idea now of what had marked my door. At the last moment, I juked sideways and by some miracle kept my feet. But the monstrous whatever it was had too much mass to turn that quickly and crashed full on into the 10 by 30 plate glass window with a noise like a bomb going off in Chartres Cathedral. By the time the thing had dug its way out of the wreckage, I was crouching on the bumper of the N35 bus on the other side of the Camino Real heading south. I could dimly see the shadow snorting and sniffing in the ruins of the showroom, but apparently it didn't see me, clinging to the bus's rear quarter panel, struggling for breath while I bled gently down the Caltrans logo and onto the asphalt that was sliding away beneath me. It doesn't really count as riding, because I didn't buy a ticket. 10. Chapter 10. That Frightened. I jumped off the bus in the Miramonte district, the southern end of the city. After a long conversation with the nervous desk clerk of a chain motel and a bribe with one of the emergency 20s out of my money belt, I finally had a place to stay. Hide out might be a better term, but I had no idea whether hiding from the thing that had just attacked me was even possible. Still, angels, demons, and even powerful malign spirits can't flout the rules of cosmic order. It's just that some of the rules are different for us folks than they are for you folks. If the monstrosity had a physical body, and it most definitely had, very strong, very hot, very mean, remember? Then it was operating on the physical plane. It might be able to track me by scent or something else, but in a city of 1 million plus, it would have to get reasonably close to me first. The thing had almost certainly been pointed in my direction by some guiding intelligence, but that probably just meant it would be haunting my familiar spots. As long as I kept moving, I should be all right, at least for a while. All the same, and not that it would slow something like that down for more than a couple of seconds, I put the chain on the motel room door and jammed a chair under the knob. I had stopped at a nearby pharmacy for first aid stuff, so after I took care of my wounds, which were fairly minor under the circumstances, I could finally leave my bandaged, Bactine-smeared body asleep on the motel bed to answer the summons from my superiors. I wasn't really looking forward to whatever was going to happen to me upstairs and wanted to put it off as long as possible, so I took the long way into the celestial city. I could do this without getting in trouble because there's really no time in heaven. When you're there is when you're there. It's all now. Yeah, it's kind of hard to explain unless you've done it. Anyway, since it wasn't going to make a difference to anyone but me, I took the long, slow way through the fields, breathing the sweet airs and letting the sight of the contented faithful dancing and singing on those infinite meadows comfort me. There's a reason we angels do what we do, I sometimes tell myself, especially when the doing part has been particularly unpleasant, frightening, or painful. And in my case, it's to bring deserving souls to this happy rest. Every success means another person gets to leave all misery, sickness, and old age behind and come to live here, forever young in the gardens of the Lord. Thinking that way helped. It always does, but it didn't make all my problems go away. It didn't make the whole mess easier to understand either. What was this horned abomination that seemed so interested in ripping my head off? It had the stink of the deeper pits of hell all over it, but it's very hard to manifest something like that in the real world. That's one of the reasons angels and demons look pretty much like regular folk when they reside on earth. It's just a lot easier to maintain something ordinary. So someone had been exerting a hideous amount of power to make that monstrous thing appear in the first place and keep it hunting me, which it had obviously been doing for at least a few days. Who wanted to hurt me that bad? I wondered if finding out what exactly that monstrosity had been would give me a clue about who sent it. It was big and nasty. That was all I knew for sure. And it sure felt like a demon, but there was something unusual about it that kept me from being certain. It seemed old somehow, primitive. Even the opposition's meanest, most monstrous fetches can usually communicate or give you the impression they could if they wanted to. The horned thing had seemed empty of any thought but violence, more like an idea brought to life than a thinking being. I'd never seen or heard anything quite like it, but it was definitely out there and definitely interested in killing the crap out of me. By the way, you may be wondering why I fought so hard not to get murdered when death isn't permanent for my kind. You're probably thinking, big deal, angel guy, so something ugly chews up your body. You can always get another body, right? But what you're missing is a few key facts. First of all, and this is always an important point, especially to me, painful death really hurts. Nobody I know wants to get eviscerated by a monster with claws like red-hot gaff hooks, even if they felt sure it was just a brief detour on their journey through eternity. Secondly, there are occasional cases where angels, or demons for that matter, aren't or can't be resurrected. That had happened to my first mentor, Leo, and Grasswax, the prosecutor, had just provided another unpleasant example of the phenomenon. Nobody talks about it much, at least in heaven, but everybody knows it happens. Every now and then an angel is destroyed and can't be brought back. The bosses always say that kind of unsupported death, charming euphemisms they got, is due to the evil workings of the opposition. But some of my colleagues over the years have whispered that it often seems to happen to the troublemakers, the kind of angels heaven won't really miss. Sacrilege, I know, but I'm just reporting what others tell me. I will say, however, that most of those others mentioned it to me because they were worried I might turn out to be one of those difficult angels. So many questions. One that had just occurred to me was, why send a monster, a massive power drain even for a strong hell minion? Why not just send a couple of lowbrow demons or human familiars with Uzis? If you bring in enough firepower, you can pretty much kill any earthbound angel. That gave me a very disturbing thought. Why was I so certain the thing had been sent to kill me? An even more frightening possibility was that it was meant to capture me. I say this because although Grasswax, the prosecutor, had eventually died, he had clearly been tortured first. And even when you're talking about hell, the motive for that is usually one of a very short list of things. Plain old sadistic revenge, or wanting to set an example, or simply to extract information. When I considered that my current plight seemed to be tied to the Walker mystery and the subsequent fate of Grasswax, a fate which he had likely suffered because someone wanted to hear what he knew about it, I was pretty certain I didn't want that thing to take me alive even more than I didn't want it to kill me. And I really don't like things killing me. Restored a little by a soothing journey through the fields, my angelic substance no longer stretched quite to the breaking point. I let myself be drawn the rest of the way to the celestial city without any subjective experience of time. The journey's not quite instantaneous. Well, actually, it's more than instantaneous, I guess, like one of those particles that can be in more than one place. You sort of flicker in one place until you're flickering in another, and I can't say it better than that. Anyway, when I entered Temuel's office, it was exactly when I was expected. But even so, he seemed agitated and impatient. "Come, Delorio," he said. My supervisor was definitely worked up about something. His light was uneven, smeary as a Christmas tree behind a wet window. "They're waiting for us." A moment later, we were out of the maze of light known as the California Building, and just as quickly out of the North American complex altogether. The mule and I found ourselves standing before the solemn gate of a palace I've never seen, or at least that I didn't remember. Another strange thing about heaven is how hard it is to recall details when you're back in a mortal body. Each time you visit the place, it's sort of new all over again. Anyway, the vast edifice was made of pure adamant, which is a heavenly way of saying slabs of diamond as big as a mountain. It did indeed tower high into the heavenly sky, which is a beautiful but more transparent blue than that of Earth, with stars showing through. The gleam of animate souls moving around inside the building could be seen through the substance of its walls. "The enactoron of the third sphere," Temuel said, and the hushed tension in his voice told me everything I didn't already know about the seat of government for the whole of earthly matters. "What are we supposed to do here?" I asked, but didn't get a reply. A moment later, we were inside. Clearly expected, too, since we didn't even have to engage with the impressively terrifying angels guarding the palace door. We appeared on one side of a great stone table, in a room that looked as large as Pasadena, with windows 100 feet high, letting in heaven's pearly light. A river, an actual river, wound its way through the substance of the polished floor, bending widely around the table, and the music of the moving water was the only sound in that massive space. A quintet of brilliant shapes hovered across from us on the far side of the table. 5 important angels. 5 very important angels, in fact. 2 who were male in aspect, 2 female, and 1 that was neither. "This is your Epherate," Temuel said, then named the waiting angels from left to right. Cariel, Jamuel, Terentia, Anaita, and Raziel. Some of the names were more than familiar. I had never had the slightest urge to be called in front of any of them, much less all of them at the same time. An Epherate is a judgment council, convened to deal with one issue. Nobody knew exactly how high angels got chosen to be ephors, but it meant that this was top-level, official business. Was I really worth that much attention? Had they summoned an Epherate because I was going to be condemned? I didn't know, but I sure hope not. Whatever it was, though, I had definitely been called on the carpet, big time. "Welcome, Delorio," said the awesomely beautiful, merciful, and loving coruscation of light that was Terentia. She was all colors, submerged in a brilliant sheen of whiteness, and seemed to be the leader of this little gathering. "God loves you." I bowed my head. It was impossible to be in a room full of so much angelic fire and not feel overwhelmed like a child in the presence of respected elders. It was even more impossible not to be afraid. "Thank you, mistress." "We are concerned about events on Earth," said the astonishing youth named Cariel, in his armor of glittering electrum, and just the touch of his mighty thoughts almost made me swoon. His colors were darker than Terentia's, ripples of black and red gleaming through his brightness like stones in the bed of a fast-flowing stream. Cariel was known all over the celestial city. He was one of the militant angels, a veteran of the fall, and in person he oozed power. I couldn't help wondering what complicated heavenly protocols made him take a place behind Terentia in this gathering. "We wish to hear everything that you know about the soul known as Edward Lyons Walker." Hearing that, I felt a tiny bit less worried. Apparently, this Epherate was investigating the Walker case, not me personally. It wouldn't save me if they decided I'd screwed up, of course, but at least the focus wasn't just on Bobby D. I told them everything I knew. Well, not every single dubious thought that had ever kindled in my secret heart, but everything else. Fatback, the waterhole, Walker's granddaughter and her idiot boyfriend, even my meeting with the Countess of Cold Hands. I won't go so far as to say higher angels can read minds, but I will say this. It would have taken a stronger soul than your narrator to hold anything important back while facing a group of them gathered as sworn ephors. I was damned frightened. You would be too if your immortal soul was literally on the line. "Why would you go out of your way to speak to this countess?" Anaita asked when I finished. "Let alone risk an incident of the sort you nearly caused." She seemed the sweetest of all those gathered, her voice that of an innocent young girl, her appearance as delicate as a rainbow just before it fades into the sunlight. But I didn't kid myself. Sweet is relative when you're talking about a creature who is probably spearing demons right and left in the last great war against Satan's hordes. "Why would you put yourself in such jeopardy, Angel Deloriel? You know the creatures of the adversary mean you nothing but harm." "Even a born liar can be useful, mistress, if only by paying attention to the lies he chooses to tell and the way he tells them," I said politely. I wanted more information. I was upset on behalf of heaven and disturbed that such a thing as the missing soul could happen. "This smacks to me of arrogance and pride." Cariel's voice rumbled like a distant storm. It might have been hard to imagine Anaita smiting demons, but it was pretty obvious Cariel probably smote a dozen or so before breakfast every morning just by way of an eye-opener. "You did not seek the counsel of your superiors. You did not address your concerns to Archangel Temuel or any others. And now, because of your well-known stubbornness, you have become entangled with one of heaven's dire foes." Jamuel's light was pearly, and there were times when I could almost make out a man-like shape beneath the radiance, like something seen in a mist. "Someone has spoken your name to a dreadful primordial spirit, a Galu, a slave of old night, which has put both your bodily raiment and your immortal soul, heaven's generous gifts, in danger." Which meant I finally knew what was after me, or at least its name, but I didn't like the soul in danger part very much at all. We are also not pleased that you changed your earthly dwelling without consulting any of those who watch over you," said Raziel, the sexless one who had been silent so far. Raziel was dark, if an angel can be dark, its light old and ruddy, like a sunset. "You are a soldier of heaven. To act without consultation suggests you do not trust the love that the highest and the ministers of the highest have for you." "That troubles me also, Deloriel," said Terentia. "Say raises a question I would have asked myself." heavenly speech, has a way of talking about the angels that are neither male or female without reducing them to it. I would hear you answer Herm. This was perhaps my most dangerous moment in front of the E48, because they were absolutely right, of course. I don't trust heaven, or at least not everyone in heaven, to have my best interests in mind. I had developed this habit over years of petty disappointments and irritations, but sometimes it seemed to run deeper even than that, as much a part of me as the shell on a turtle or the claws on a badger. And that's where I'm going to stop for tonight, because we still have a goodly chunk left in this section, but it's 8 o'clock. So I will continue with the meeting with the E48, which, by the way, just in case you haven't read the book or don't remember it, it's spelled Ephorate, E48. And the individual angels in this role are E4s, Ephors. I know for me, I always like things better when I know how they're spelled. So with that, I want to thank you all so much for joining me and spending some time with me. It's always a big pleasure. I am going to return to my dog wrangling. I will be back, as far as I know, I see of no reason why not, next week to continue with the reading of The Dirty Streets of Heaven. So until that time comes, I abjure you, please take good care of yourselves, because you are important. While you're doing so, take good care of your family and loved ones as well, and keep an eye out for those who are perhaps not so closely related to you, but might be in need of a kind word, a smile, just asking them, how are things going? So while you take care of that, I will take care of my version of that on my end, which will include a lot of snacky biscuits for dogs. And I will see you very soon. So until then, peace and be well, and have a good one. See you soon.